Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the City of Homestead special call meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, July 6, 2021, and it's 5:31 p.m. The city will hold a hybrid special call council meeting. The public may participate in person at City Hall or virtually utilizing video conference via WebEx events or the toll-free conference call number. Please go to cityofhomestead.com/calendar for specific details and instructions on participation utilizing video and telephonic conferencing. The meeting can also be viewed live on the City Access channel or city website at cityofhomestead.com. Public comments can be made in person at the meeting or emailed to publiccomments@cityofhomestead.com. Written public comments are limited to 300 words per comment. Written public comments on specific agenda items should include your name, address, and the items you wish to comment on, and your comment. These may be submitted by noon on Monday, July 5th, 2021, and will be included in the minutes. Written public comments on general matters should also include your name, address, and your comment, and may be submitted up until 30 minutes after the end of the meeting and will be included in the minutes. Roll call, Madam Clerk.
Councilman Fletcher,
Here.
Councilwoman Bailey, Councilman Shelley.
Here.
Councilman Roth,
Here.
Mayor Losner.
Here. Thank you. Madam Manager, do we have any additions, deletions, or deferrals?
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. Vice Mayor is on. Vice Mayor?
I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have one deletion, tab 2, card number 3197.
Do we need an action on that?
No,
No.
not
All
at this
right,
time.
Thank you. All right, then we'll continue to tab 1, car number 3212, purchase of switchgate pad mounts for inventory. Madam Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. The City of Homestead Procurement Division purchases various sizes of voltage pad-mounted switchgear for the electric utilities inventory for use by the department on an as-needed basis. Typically, we would not have to bring this to council. We order this as needed to have on hand, but due to the increase in costs, and particularly my understanding is with increased steel costs, a lot of our prices are going up above the $25,000 limit. And as you can see, both of these are above $25,000. Staff recommends Mayor and Council authorize the City Manager to award requests for quote 617-2021-27-XR to Stewart Irby for the purchase of switchgear pad mount 15 kV type PM11 in the amount of $25,269, and Gresco Utility Supply for the purchase of a switchgear pad mount 15 kV type PM-9 in the amount of $25,074.44.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from council? Is there anyone either online or in chambers wishing to speak on this matter?
I don't see anybody online, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I will close the public comments and entertain a motion for approval. Moved by Councilman Roth. Second by Councilman Shelley. Anything further from council? Roll call.
Councilwoman Bailey? Councilman Roth? Councilman Fletcher?
Yes.
Councilman Shelley?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Faircloth Staggers?
Yes.
Mayor Losner?
Yes.
You want to vote on this?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Any further, Madam Manager?
No, Mayor, thank you.
Mr. Attorney, anything further? Motion to adjourn? Moved by Councilman Roth, seconded by Councilman Fletcher. All in favor? Any opposed? This meeting's adjourned, and we will roll over into the workshop. Ready? Okay. In just a couple of minutes, let the clerk retool for the next meeting. Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the City of Homestead City Council Workshop to order. It is 5:39 PM. The city will hold a hybrid council workshop. The public may participate in person at City Hall or virtually utilizing video conference via WebEx events or the toll-free conference call number. Please go to cityofhomestead.com/calendar for specific details and instructions on participation utilizing video and telephonic conferencing. The meeting can also be viewed live on the City Access channel or city website at cityofhomestead.com. Public comments can be made in person at the meeting or emailed to publiccomments@cityofhomestead.com. Written public comments are limited to 300 words each and should include your name and address and may be submitted up until 30 minutes after the end of the workshop and will be included in the minutes. Roll call, Madam Clerk.
Councilman Shelley?
Here.
Councilman Roth?
Here.
Councilwoman Bailey? Here. Councilman Fletcher?
Here.
Councilwoman Avila?
Here.
Vice Mayor Fairclough Staggers?
Here.
Mayor Losner?
Here. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. All right, our one and only item tonight is discussion on car number 3216, the downtown land use and zoning presentation. Mr. Cordino?
Yes, sir. I'm being told to hold off. Got it. We're ready. Thank you. We're here today to talk about downtown land use and zoning. And so what I wanted to do today was give a brief introduction, go through the PowerPoint that I developed. I'll make it quick. And I think either way you want to handle this, you can stop me and ask questions at any time during the presentation. It's full of pretty interesting information. So I think, or just hold off to the end, whichever you prefer. So we'll give a little bit of an introduction, and what I want to, in thinking about this presentation, I figured, okay, we got to figure out where downtown is. What is it today? You know, what do other downtowns look like? What do we want our downtown to look like in the future? This all kind of dovetails into the discussion that the county's having about the rapid transit zone proposal. We'll talk about what we are trying to achieve as a city and then how we wanted to get there. So a little bit of it is go back. If we're looking at downtown, I think in terms of the planning aspects of it, I think we need to consider not only our zoning code, but our land use, and that's in our comprehensive plan. And really the land use in the comp plan tell us what can go in a certain location. And that means things that we generally say residential, commercial, industrial, and then kind of how much. Our comp plan and our zoning code get into very specific. Get very specific. They're not very. It's not general at all. It drills down specifically. So we'll get there in a moment. The comp plan also tells us the density and intensity that we're allowed to have, the dwelling units per acre for density, and that's population, and then the intensity of the development, which is commercial, which is usually given in floor area ratio, or how much of an acre, for instance, or a lot that the building can consume. And then finally, we get to the zoning code, which is how all that stuff will specifically fit on an individual site. And that's where we start to talk about architecture, height, setbacks, lot size, pervious area, even the color of some buildings. So I started to think about it and figured, okay, what exactly is downtown? It's a pretty big city geographically, and it's got a lot of population. So where's downtown? In general, I think we would kind of say that this area here, kind of west of the Turnpike around US 1, is the downtown area. But where exactly is it? If we were to draw on a map, if I was to give everybody a map, an aerial of downtown, and ask you to circle downtown, I'm having a feeling we probably get 7 different locations for it. So I figured let's start with the location of the transit stations that are being planned, and this also dovetails with the county's rapid transit zone. I think that combining the two efforts is particularly useful in this instance as an example. So we have 3 transit stations that are planned, and they're a little distance apart. And if you looked at what the county is saying in good urban planning, you would say that the half-a-mile radius around the transit stations is really kind of a transit-oriented development area. And if you put all these things together and you did a half a mile around each of our 3 transit stations, you get an area kind of that looks like that. Or in summary, it looks like this guy here. So when you look at that area from a comprehensive planning perspective, we have 8 different land uses that are there, and you can see them as I've listed them there. Planned urban neighborhood, technology mixed use, institutional, light commercial, mixed use residential, neighborhood mixed use, high commercial use, and downtown mixed use. In that area, that land use, we have about 624 acres of land within the half-mile radius of our 3 transit stations. And that equates to potentially, I think, 6,500 dwelling units. And this graphic breaks down the number of units per acre and the allowable dwelling units within them, and that's how we come up with that number. You'll notice that we have 3 different mixed-use categories in the downtown, and maybe this is an area of potential consolidation when we start to think about where we want to go with downtown. I think it's a great idea to have mixed use because you put commercial and residential in the same area, but do we really need 3 in the area, and how different are they? They're all implemented by a handful of various zoning categories. In the zoning overlay of downtown, we have, again, 624 acres. We have 14 different zoning categories in an area surrounded by the downtown. The planned urban neighborhood, which is primarily the southwest neighborhood, is the largest, 176 acres, and then a lot of B1 and government property in there. But this breaks down. So that's a lot of zoning categories. Kind of points to what we're saying about our comprehensive plan. It's very broad. It's 8 different land use categories, 14 different zoning categories. It seems like a lot. It seems very confusing to try to administer that as applicants come into a downtown and try to deal with the checkerboard that we're working with in the area. But generally, when we talk about residential zoning, we are in these 4 zoning categories, and in general, we're dealing with a height of 35 feet, property setbacks from between 10 and 25 feet, and lot areas between 2,000 and 3,600 square feet on average. When we start to talk about the non-residential zoning, we're typically dealing with a height of 70 feet and 80% lot coverage, 85% lot coverage, and setbacks of 10 to 20 feet in the front, and then the other ones on the side. What I did was break down the zoning categories individually. We don't have to spend much time on these next few slides, but it just kind of tells you what the zoning categories are for and the details of them. And there's one in particular I want to get to. I want to just briefly stop on this one for a second. This is a snapshot of our zoning code. This says this is the B1A. Each of the zoning categories is relatively similar in a sense. You'll notice when we start to talk about professional business uses only permitted, no other uses permitted within the district, and then we start to list them, and we have a very specific list, and this is kind of where it becomes comical at a certain point. Antique shops, arts art goods and bric-a-brac, which I haven't yet defined yet. I haven't looked that up. Does anybody look bric-a-brac up? I don't know what my grandmother she used to say that a lot. Banks, of course, doctors' offices, but then you start to get into things, doctors, dentists, optometrists, lawyers, and attorneys. I thought they were almost the same thing these days. Accountants, CPAs are different, engineers, and all other professional personnel. So this is really, I think, what we can streamline as we go forward, right? You may just want to say professional offices, right? And not have to say CPAs and accountants, or lawyers and attorneys, or doctors, dentists, optometrists. It seems to be redundant. You could get away with that. You could say professional offices or retail and not have to get into the individual uses, because the theory is that if the use isn't listed here, it's not allowed. So I guess that's why they said lawyers and attorneys to cover everything in the law profession. But if you don't see your list up here, then you're out, and then that's where we're having to make a decision in 2021 with a code that was written with language back in the 1950s, and those things kind of make it challenging to go through. So I don't want to dwell longer on that. It's just an example of what we're dealing with. But as we're thinking about what we want to do and what we want to achieve in a downtown, I think it's useful for you all to discuss what are our goals. Is it revenue? Is it new businesses? Is it economic development? Is it the diversity of housing stock, affordable housing, market rate housing, a different style of housing? What are we trying to achieve? If we understood that very well, I think we could start to design a downtown. And then we get hung up, I think experience tells us we get hung up a lot on density, right? And what is density? What does it really mean? And a lot of times, I've noticed that we're very scared of the word density, but Miami-Dade County has its most prevalent form of development is typified by what we have kind of east of the turnpike here, and that is a very low amenity, tightly packed, low density development. And it's just of the density to not support any type of rapid transit, but it's not high enough density to it's high enough density to create just tons of traffic. And unfortunately, all this stuff is the kind of a product of a post-World War II type of development that you didn't start to see in South Dade until we started to get into the 1970s and the DRI. You take places further north, South Miami, Pinecrest, Palmetto Bay, and Cutler Bay, and they developed kind of organically on the existing gridded street network, which set up on the mile and the half mile, and they developed. When they put together the DRI, you started to develop in pods, right? That the roads didn't all go through. So the gridded roadway network is even more broad. The developments can have as few as one or two ways in or out, and then that type of development takes these relatively not transit-oriented densities, but pretty closely packed in developments, and forces everybody's got to have a car, if not one or two, to get anywhere, even to the grocery store, let alone work, which is like we talked about before, for most of us north of 88th Street. But you've got to get out of the neighborhood, then onto this very broad mile and half mile section line grid, and all the traffic sits on that grid, and it's just a nightmare. And that's stuff you see in the DRI type development. You see this in Western Broward County as well, and that's kind of what creates the traffic jams. And what this has done is created a lack of affordable housing. It's accelerated transportation costs, and it's made for an inequitable distribution of resources. And South Dade has some of the highest transportation costs in the state of Florida, just because there's work is so far away and from where we all live. So those are things that
Let me jump in real quick.
Yes, sir.
And I think for this discussion and other discussions we're going to have when proposals for the old City Hall site come in and as we talk about code issues, I think it's important for all of us to have a common definition of some terms. And I'll look to you. You're the planner guy. Let's have I'd like to look to you for our working definition of both affordable housing and market rate housing. as it means different things to different people. And I'd like us all to kind of have that same term of art in mind, or, the same definition in mind as we continue to have these conversations.
Good idea. I'll do that for the next meeting. But essentially, market rate housing is something that sells on the open market, right? And affordable housing, there is a formula that's associated with that, right? That the government puts together, and I don't know the formula right off the top of my head, but I'll get it for the next meeting.
Well,
Typically,
what I was getting at, affordable housing doesn't mean it's cheaper. It means it's subsidized in some form. It's
yes, I think
somebody's rent is assisted or kept artificially low. Affordable in this context does not mean because somebody built 100 units per the acre, economy of scale makes it cheaper for somebody to come and pay market rates.
they're correct, and that's a good. Thanks for the catch, because I think the subtlety. What I was trying to suggest was not the affordable housing that we all may talk about in. Let me see if I say this correct. So I think you're correct. When somebody says affordable housing, it is generally subsidized housing because it costs a certain amount to build a building, a house, or whatever. And so when you talk about affordable housing where the government puts the formula together, right, that's subsidized. And a lot of times, because the land has a cost, construction has a cost, it all has a base cost. And what happens is that at some point, the government's given an incentive for the landlord or the owner of the building to keep the cost of the unit within the formula. And that goes with, a lot of times they'll give what they call a density bonus. Okay, so if you can develop X percent of this development has to be quote unquote affordable, fit into that formula. And if you do that, we'll give you a bonus of X amount more units so that you can make, so that ultimately the developer needs to make money, right? Or why do the development if they're not going to turn a profit? Now, what the profit is, the profit margin, that's debatable, but nobody goes into business to lose money. And so therefore, that type of housing is subsidized. What I'm talking about when I said affordable in the previous slide was they're market rate units sold on the open market. They're not subsidized. They just cost less than in other places, right? So the housing cost tends to be less to the west and the south of the county and more in the center. So if you're going to go to Miami Beach or Coral Gables or some place like that, or Doral, with the housing and the jobs in the same area, the housing cost typically goes up. And so these houses are some of the ones that cost the less in the county. That's what I meant by affordable in that sense. Is that helpful? But I'll get the formula for the other thing as we go forward. Let me go back. What other things that we need to talk about when we talk about the issues that impact density are units an acre, obviously, floor area ratio, height, setback, parking, open space, and then we're always dealing with concurrency or the provision of infrastructure. These are typical densities that you would see by housing types. So small single-family homes are between 8 and 12 dwelling units an acre. Duplexes can be between 16 and 24. Townhomes, 20 and 30, all the way up to large-scale mixed use, which can be typically between 30 and 100 dwelling units an acre. And these are just graphics of the typologies, a little bit easier to understand. When we start to talk about density, the actual densities can be significantly less than the gross densities that you put on a map. And that's the exercise we're going to go through in a second. It kind of will speak to that. The numbers can seem very, very large. Mixed use, however, has much less of a proportional impact on public services. It's easier to service than just single-family residential development. So there are different types of development. I thought since we were talking about a downtown and we have 3 transit stations that are coming within the community, we should talk about transit-oriented development and non-transit-oriented development. People tend to not understand what they are, but really, when you're developing around transit systems, you're just kind of grouping similar uses together in almost a radial form. And you can see that this is kind of textbook stuff, and we're going to get into this a little bit more deeply. But it's by the book, you should develop around the transit station. That's where you would have most of your people, and you don't necessarily need to develop in between the transit stations unless these things were really tightly packed together. And generally, transit stations aren't packed too tight together because you need to spread it out a little bit to make the transit system work. And so that's a graphic of how that is done. And these types of things are then when you get into the core of the half-mile radius around the transit station, you're talking about a transit core, which is highly walkable, where you may not have a lot of parking at all. You'd have your taller buildings, a lot of your people, and it's almost self-sufficient. And then as you get further out, we're starting to think about these downtowns. The further you get from that transit core, within a half mile, you start to talk about it's a 5-minute bike or ride, and then you kind of taper down, kind of like you look at a downtown and the tallest buildings are in the center, and they kind of flatten out like a pyramid. That's how we start to do the planning around a downtown like that. Like I said, these types of things, I think what I'm talking about here and what the county is talking about in the future are those developments between a quarter mile and a half mile of the transit stations. And so that's, for the purpose of this exercise, what we'll do. So that segues us into the county's proposed rapid transit zone, just to explain what they're suggesting here and see how it matches with what our conversation is. Everything we're talking about here is impacted by the county's rapid transit zone proposal. This is true. This is an attempt by the county to increase densities and generate ridership for rapid transit. In other parts, it's been said they want to generate ridership for rail, but we already have a bus rapid transit system that's coming on board. So the question is, are we going to shoot for rail right now, or is that something for the future? But the other corridors are shooting for rail. This was originally conceived in the 1970s, believe it or not. It's existed on the books since then, but it's only been part of the unincorporated areas. The circles that I'm going to show you on this map have been around since the 70s. They've kind of moved, but they haven't been approved to move. So there's a debate there. The purpose of the population densities was also to fund the operations and the maintenance, not only supply the ridership, but fund the operations and maintenance of the rapid transit. And like we were saying earlier, South Dade is the only corridor in all of the 6 corridors in the county with an approved rapid transit line. So we've got that going for us, as they say. A little bit closer, if you look at this graphic, is what it is in the southern part of Miami-Dade County. All the smart plan corridors now are proposed to have this on a half a mile each side, incorporated and unincorporated. Right now it exists that this is only in the unincorporated area. Then they would have half a mile radius around the stations, or what they're calling the rapid transit zones. There is a comprehensive planning issue with this, that it only applies to the unincorporated areas, so we'd have to delve into that. You can see that darker brown color on the graphic. The land isn't in Homestead, but it is rapid transit zones or urban center zoning overlays that have been approved in Miami-Dade County along the corridor. And that, as you drive up US 1, that's where you start to see those moderately dense buildings coming up in the area. So this is what it looks like in Homestead. We've got about, again, it's a half mile from the corridor, and we have a station area in it. If you see the red dot that I put up there, that is the urban center district. So when they talk about urban centers, they don't mean every station area. They had drawn circles on the map in the 70s that are urban centers, and there are 3 types of urban centers. There's a community center, a metropolitan center, and a regional center. The middle-sized urban center is a metropolitan center. There are 3 of them in South Dade, and there is Dadeland, which is built. There is the Southland Mall in Cutler Bay, which is not built but approved and re-land used and rezoned about 15 years ago. And they've been seeking development, Dadeland style development, but haven't been able to attract it yet, so the market doesn't exist. And there's Homestead, planned, but not approved. So, for instance, this circle doesn't have a land use or a zoning associated with it that anybody could come in and build. And what you'll see this means is that, again, you see the corridors and the rapid transit zones, that area half a mile in around the corridor, this red area in Homestead, not the circle, you can see that is going to have a zoning within the first quarter mile of potentially 60 dwelling units an acre, and the second quarter mile out, 36 dwelling units an
I think
acre.
Councilman Roth has a question.
Yeah,
Joe, that red dot you're showing us, it's hard, we can't see it on our map, but where is that?
that is, that we'd have to pinpoint that exactly because it generally moves. It's supposed to be around one of our transit stations. It's not given necessarily an exact location right now. So we have to get into that and figure it out. These circles have subtly moved over time, and this doesn't have necessarily an address to it. But I'll pinpoint it before the next meeting.
And Joe, that 60 units an acre you were about to talk about is a minimum. Metropolitan Station can have up to 250 units an acre, correct?
Yeah, correct. Let's go. So the corridor area, the half a mile, first quarter mile and the second quarter mile on each side of the busway, right? The first quarter mile can have what is proposed to have a minimum of 60 dwelling units an acre. The second quarter of a mile is proposed to have a minimum of 36 dwelling units an acre. So that's, I'll get into that a little bit more. Now, the urban centers, not necessarily the stations, but the urban centers, that circle, the red circle that we don't know exactly where it's at, but just let's pretend it's around our southernmost station. It is a metropolitan community center. Now, these, in a metropolitan community center, the density is a maximum of 250 dwelling units an acre. So in that circle, theoretically, if the county had its way with this, or we adopted what Dadeland looks like, or Southland Mall in Cutler Bay, 250 dwelling units an acre. So these are, this graphic talks about this. The intent of the rapid transit zone is to kind of limit the zoning codes, add limits to it. So it's giving you maximums on the corridor, or minimums on the corridor, maximum in the circle area. If this whole ordinance were to be approved, the cities would have the opportunity to adopt the county's zoning rules and incorporate them immediately, or be more restrictive, meaning more dense, but you couldn't necessarily be less dense. If the zoning were to change at all, it would have to change to at least this, all right? And you may not have to change necessarily for a little while, but when you did and suggested a zoning change, they would get it to change. It could only go to this. So the analysis of this, it's a little choppy right now. It's, you can see there's minimums, there's maximums. It's not really planned very specifically or tailored to the communities. It's very broad, it's very general. It doesn't take into account individual parcels or actual downtowns or buffers or anything like that. And it's just not the way, it's not refined enough to be highly productive. Typically, that refinement comes through processes like this that we're talking about now, and exactly how we want the downtowns to actually work. And I've been part of those processes before, and that's where you really start to give an area to it, right? It may not be the exact 1 mile radius or half-mile radius around the station area, but it may be an irregular shaped area. Like, for instance, in Cutler Bay, it was the property of the Southland Mall that was there and potentially redeveloped. It was not necessarily limited to that. So the half mile stretches out into single-family housing, and it's not what they necessarily wanted. And during the Cutler Bay process, we were able to say, okay, we'll take 250 dwelling units an acre, but we're not going to go 25 stories, right? I think it's limited to an average of 17 stories, those types of things. So we refine it through processes like this. Height, like I said, 25 stories. The regional center is limited only by the aviation department, so you don't run a plane into the building. The community center is 15 stories. We don't have that here, but along the corridor, their height is limited at 6 stories, both inside the first quarter mile and in the second quarter mile. Floor area ratio, again, in the first quarter mile is 2.0, and we'll talk about floor area ratio later, but that's just how much of the actual property can you consume with the building, and the second quarter mile is 1.5. In the urban centers, so if you were the metropolitan center, your floor area ratio would be unlimited, and that's something that you would work out as you did your planning. So let's go to this graphic. This is of interest. This is how we figured out, like we said before, what the potential number of units were in the area half a mile around our transit stations, basically what the county's planning as our corridor. This doesn't account for the metropolitan center or any of that type of stuff, 250 units an acre. This is just the 60 and the 36 dwelling units an acre. But in our comp plan right now, we show that we can get 6,500 dwelling units out of it. So if you started to add up the county's proposal of the 60 and the 30 in the 2 mile area, we realize that we have 2 miles. The area of our corridor is 2 miles wide, right? It's a quarter mile, half mile on each side to get 1 square mile. We start to figure this out. We got about, like we said, 624 acres. In the 60 dwelling units an acre, in that quarter of a mile, you can get 37,000 dwelling units. Right? And if you add to that the second quarter of a mile, while you got 36 dwelling units an acre, you get another 22,000 dwelling units. So in all actuality, you can get the zoning to going to 60, then 36, gives you 59, close to 60,000 additional dwelling units in this area, which is effectively a 916% increase from what we can have today, which is significant. And if you looked at that citywide, we have, I think there are another 24, I think there are 24,000 dwelling units total in the city, so we have another 17 outside of that area. We would go from 24,000 to 77,000 dwelling units. Again, that 53 on top of our 24 is a 321% increase citywide. So that takes our population from an estimated number of, say, 68,000 to about 218,000. So if this were implemented and built out under the county's proposal, we could have 150 extra thousand people in the city of Homestead, increasing the population to 218, which is a significant number, almost over a 300% increase in population. Mayor, those are the figures you asked for recently to see what it would do to the city. So I guess we should probably look at a middle ground between increasing the population to somewhere over 200,000 people in the city. Just pack them into that area. So that explains a little bit about the land use and zoning and densities that you may want to think about in a downtown compared against the proposal that Miami-Dade County has and what it would do to us in Homestead. But then we thought we would take a look at what this development generally looked like. Remember, there are 3 different centers that they have in their districts. The county does, and community, metropolitan, regional, and these have typologies to them. And the county went through an exercise recently to figure out what people preferred. Homestead participated in that and there's another report out that shows that. But we wanted to kind of go back through that exercise and figure out what does this stuff actually look like when you put it into place. What is a community center supposed to be, and what does it look like? And we see here that they say that the community center is relatively small, plan to service a more localized community, moderate to smaller sized businesses, lower scale in structures, some mid-rise at the nodes or along the arterials, but not overwhelming. The Metropolitan Center, like Homestead is planned to be, pedestrian block sizes and a network of streets and pedestrian access ways designed that you can walk very easily in there. Increased sidewalk widths, landscaping, parking reductions, moderate setbacks, floor area ratios of 1.5, and maximum densities of dwelling units, about 250 dwelling units an acre. The only regional center we have is downtown Miami. That's a 500 dwelling unit an acre a maximum density, with height limited by the aviation department. So we went and dug up some pictures of what some of these things might look like. And this is a metropolitan center. This is Dadeland. It's 250 units an acre. It's 25 stories. It looks like that. Something very similar. The health district in west of downtown Miami, north of the baseball stadium, very similar. 250 units an acre. This is more commercial than residential. Dadeland is truly mixed use. This is Merrick Park in Coral Gables, something similar. And if you drove US 1 in that area right now, you start to see the larger buildings coming in right immediately to the northwest side of US 1. This is the Wynwood area, downtown in the background. All mixed use type of product, shopping malls, transit associated with every one of them. Those graphics I just showed you are what the whole areas would look like in the metropolitan center form. And we wanted to figure out what did the individual buildings look like from a density perspective. That you could get something like this at 36 units an acre. We talked about this building here, the development like this is approximately 50 dwelling units an acre, 48 dwelling units an acre. Something like this is plus or minus 30 dwelling units an acre. And I just show you these to get some perspective and scale so we can figure out if you wanted to put something in downtown and upzone it, what can we get out of it? This graphic shows something like this. It could work in 40 units an acre. Something to this scale, something like 50 units an acre. And so we don't need to spend much time dwelling on this. I mean, I think that this is a graphic that the county had put together in a recent study trying to support the population employment around the transit stations to support the bus rapid transit system. And this is the graphic that they drew for that. So it's in concept only. The interesting thing that we have is that the county's got two separate reports. They'd come in with a report that suggests this 60, 36 dwelling units an acre in the corridor and the 250 in the station area, which is, like we were talking about, a very blunt tool. But they had done an analysis through the TPO, which looked specifically at the station areas along the bus rapid transit system in South Dade, and attempted to show what type of, not density necessarily, but population and employment would be needed in the station area to be technically supportive of the bus rapid transit system. If you were to submit an application to the Federal Transit Administration and rank at a certain level, how much population and employment would you need in there? And it was very scientific, and they've given us those numbers. And I think we are a little bit below those numbers in our potential right now, but those numbers aren't the numbers that I showed you through what would happen if you did the proposal that the county's proposing. I mean, we're talking, we may need to add thousands of people with densities of certainly less than 30 dwelling units an acre to attain a realistic supportive population and employment density to support the rapid transit system, not hundreds of thousands of people. So that's why I talked about at some point when we think about this, there's got to be a middle ground somewhere. So I guess that's the presentation, and I thought we would enter into discussion of where do you want to go and how do you want to get there. That will help us go back and put our thoughts together to help get you to somewhere you want to be. So with that, I'll conclude.
Thank you, Joe. Very
You're welcome.
enlightening. Appreciate that. Council? Who wants to kick off the conversation? Mr. Fletcher?
Like the word moratorium more and more, based off of that. Only question I have, so this is the plan the county plans on moving forward. What do we have as a body to do to try and fight something if my colleagues would like to move forward and helping push back against this whole process that the county's trying to push down our throats? So,
Well, so what I've been told through the mayor hosted at the opening of the rapid transit station, Commissioner Oliver Gilbert had come to Homestead, met with the mayors and managers of the South Dade cities. And his commitment to us at that meeting was that this was a work in process. It was going to be refined, and that, he hoped to listen to everybody and accommodate them. And eventually, as this thing wound its way through the system, it would be modified into something that everybody could support. I think that through the League of Cities, we've been looking at this. I think that the most dangerous thing about this proposal is it takes municipal control away, meaning that what I didn't mention in there was, the cities would still, if you adopted this, the cities would still have the opportunity to review and approve developments within the area. But the applicant could appeal to the county, and the county could overturn the city's decision at any time, which means we don't have really any control over the process. So I think the first step that needs to be taken is that we push back on the loss of control. I mean, it would be preferable that the cities adopted something on their own. This is a personal feeling. I think that if we say we're not willing to do anything, it makes us more vulnerable to them imposing something on us. But that's my personal opinion.
well, I understand that, but again, I think that takes the whole appeal from the city of Homestead away from those who do want to move here. So I think that's something we definitely need to look at as a group here to make sure we're trying to create this community that we want to have, and support the people that already live here. And if you go stuffing, another 25, 35, 45, 55, 150,000 people down here, it just takes away completely from what this community started out as. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, and I want to clarify that through the League of Cities, a committee composed largely of the impacted mayors and some of the town managers and others have had other meetings, and Mr. Cordino did a really nice and comprehensive presentation about what those numbers would mean, for example, for his community. And, the impact there is just, in my words, just as egregious there as I feel it is in taking away the character of our community and blowing population all out of proportion. And seemingly from the first committee meeting where Mr. Cordino, wearing his hat as president of the Miami-Dade League of Cities, chaired the committee, and jump in if I'm mischaracterizing, that there was an overwhelming pushback by that group against the preemption of local rights. Now, and I think what we have going here is kind of a, pardon the pun, dual track discussion. I think that the councilwoman, independent of the RTZ issues, you asked for a discussion about what is provided for in our downtown now, what do we want our downtown to look at, and how can we get there from here. So I think a large part of that is based on that inquiry is, what have we done, what is in place that's right, what is in place that can be done better, what's in place that's wrong, to help generate commercial and retail development downtown, which coincidentally now is dovetailing with this RTZ, Rapid Transit Zone ordinance, that the county is trying to impose upon us. So I think our timing is very good, and it's interesting. One of the takeaways I had from your presentation on ours is that the slide that talked about land use and the 624 acres within the half mile. When you distill that down, I came up with 399 residential acres, which equates to over 16 units per acre, which for me is a little on the high side, and so is 6 stories. And, you know, I'd like us to take a look and revisit downtown densities, heights, building setbacks from the street, the scope and scale and so forth. And I think certainly we probably need to work toward a definition, you know, and if we need to call it transit-oriented development, so be it. But I think for me, you know, having this put in front of me, it raises the issue of, are we too dense? Are we too liberal with our height and the scope and scale of what we allow in the downtown area? For my personal opinion, I don't think anything should be over 4 stories. Nothing should overshadow this building, the police station, or the Cybrarium and Homestead Station. And I think that, for me, that sets the mark of height. Nothing's overshadowed, and I think at maybe 4 stories, we can maintain the character and feel of a smaller town downtown. So, you know, we've got those 2 issues at work. I will admit that, you know, I'll have to agree with those who say you've got to have people living in or near downtown in order for downtown to be successful. And I'll put it out there, and I've said it in editorials. In Deep South Dade and Homestead, higher density has always equated to purely subsidized housing. And I think that's the tightrope we as a community are walking, that they don't necessarily have those concerns in the more affluent communities to the north of us, but certainly in Deep South Dade, I feel as though we have that real balancing issue, not to become just an extension of that US 1 corridor in our downtown, or in my hypothetical example of Homestead Plaza being redeveloped. I'm fearful that we now have permitted uses and heights and densities in place that can wipe out what I believe we're all trying to work toward for a character and a feel of our downtown. So with that, Mr. Shelley, Councilman Shelley?
Thank you, Mayor. And you answered some of my questions, because unfortunately I missed the last workshop, so I was trying to figure out what was the discussion topic, you know, where to go, and I think you've helped clarify that for me. And so I think on the downtown, I share some of your thought processes and feelings. This is one of the areas, as far as you talk about density and especially getting more bodies downtown, that I've always struggled with when it came to the downtown revitalization plan. I've always been on task with everything else that we've done, the downtown, you know, the city hall, the commercial investments, all of that I was gung-ho about and for and believed in. I've always struggled with that last frontier, which is how do you get the bodies there and at what density level? And I think one of the things, Joe, you know, that you spoke about, a lot of this discussion dealt with I guess just the fundamentals of development, you know, so it kind of lays out how things are looked at. But one of the things I don't think were discussed, and which is where I always struggle, is when I have met with a few developers that have been interested in investing in the downtown, and then it comes down to the dollars and cents. So it's one of those things where, like you, Mayor, I don't want the density. I really don't want that density. But I also know that it may not succeed, because if we don't give them enough density, they won't build. So, you know, nobody will show up. And or what'll happen is, that'll be the next question is, okay, well, you're only going to let me build 30 units per acre, 20 units per acre. So I need to subsidize it because I can't make my money. And therefore, the only product I'm going to build is some form of affordable subsidized housing, where if you let me build 100 units per acre, now I can get my money's worth out of it. I'll build market rate housing, and I'll be able to build the product that maybe the city wants and the developer wants. And so I think that's part of the discussion too, as far as a dollars and cents portion, maybe not today, but in the future, getting a developer's point of view. What do we need to provide for in order to actually encourage the development? Because you mentioned, Cutler Bay, they've allowed, 250 units per acre, and they can't get development either. So at that point, then maybe that's not the right answer. Maybe we go back and say, well, let's just establish what we want it to be. Let's set our vision, and let's see if they ever show up, versus going to some level that apparently isn't working in Cutler Bay, and they're farther north than we are. Granted, we have maybe a unique feel. We're right on the rapid transit. I don't know, but that's something I think that I'd like to have some discussions about as well, just as far as not just density in a vacuum, but density and what is it needed in order to actually get a developer to come in and invest in our community and get us those density areas or the body mass that we need to then spur the commercial side to do everything else that we need to finish off to make that downtown successful. So I don't know if I'll ever get to the density that we need to. I don't know if I'll ever be able to vote for that, but I acknowledge that it is a discussion that we need to have, and ultimately, with more facts, maybe I would, but right now I don't like the idea of it. So
I think that's what we need to hear from our side, so we can go back and get you the information that you need so that we can figure out exactly what we want to see in the downtown, right? I mean, it's confusing, right? It's hard to imagine what we want it to look like, and that's why I wanted to start off with looking at these pictures of what other places do look like. I think it's totally. We do have a benchmark. I mean, if we wanted to become transit supportive, the county's done an analysis, and it shows population numbers, and they're not hard to attain. So theoretically, you get there without really much of a change, I think, to the look and feel. You can also see that you can add subtle amounts of population and not have to be very tall whatsoever. I mean, it can be done in a different form. There are very non-dense high-rise buildings. It's funny, there's a thing called the Porsche Tower, I think it is, in Sunny Isles Beach or something like that. And it's a giant building, but it's completely not dense because it's like 1 unit per floor, right? And everybody's they drive their car in there, the elevator takes their car up to their unit, and there's a garage in it. So we think that this big, giant, tall building is really dense, but it's really a low-density high-rise. But you can do moderately dense things within the envelope of what our zoning code says now, which is, residential is only 35 feet, right? And most of the US 1 corridor is got a 4-story height limit on it. And it's hard to think that you really need to do much more than 4 stories to put impactful transit-oriented densities that would have a benefit to the community and the transit system in the area. I don't think you need to go to 25 stories.
Oh, and I want to add just, you and I have been dealing with the RTZ, Joe, but the stated purpose in a couple of different meetings is that in theory, the density, the extremely high density will create ridership in order to pay for operations. This is not saying if you get a bunch of folks down here, you're going to get rail or elevated rail. This is, in my world, subsidizing rail that's going over to Miami Beach. There's no promise of, so let's not get fooled by the carrot of high density can give us better transit. And certainly my preference would be to create a job center here rather than having our folks have to travel however, by whatever means it may be to go to their place of employment. And, I'd like us to find that happy median, at what number of people do we get really neat restaurants and businesses downtown and on the old City Hall site potentially and further up Chrome Avenue and create jobs here so they don't have to leave. I think, the transit is a means to, as I've said, it works both directions. If we can become a destination, just as Wynwood is, or Brickell Village, or what have you, that would be my goal and my vision, rather than just being a bedroom downtown to to have folks that go to work somewhere else.
And I think that's a great idea and very interesting. And in looking at this county in South Dade, it's really complicated, right? So Dadeland springs up, but that's the product of a Metro Rail investment and developers and whatever. Cutler Bay has had the same goals that you have, right? And we've always talked about the fact that I think the majority of people there are no major employment centers in South Dade. And if you know, I don't know how many, I think it's most of the people, if not 3/4 of the people, are driving north of 88th Street every morning to go to work. And you wouldn't need a $300 million or $1 billion transit investment if you put employment centers in South Dade. If Homestead had an employment center or Cutler Bay had those two actual downtowns in South Dade had employment centers, you could eliminate the traffic flow problem with the employment centers. But how do you get there? I think we need to seek advice of others, because Cutler Bay zoned it like we're talking about here, and they did what the county wanted them to do, and it's not, and they couldn't, I mean, they're going like we used to go to Las Vegas to go hunt developers for our facilities here. We had luck. They're not having any luck with it. So it's a market issue. In fact, they I believe owned, those two big pink office towers off the turnpike. Cutler Bay, I don't know if they still own them or not, but they have a terrible time leasing those buildings for office space right now. They're probably the two biggest office buildings south of downtown, or Coral Gables anyway, and there's just no market for it. So, the question is, how do you attract the businesses down here? And I don't know if COVID's been very helpful in that at all. I just don't know if there's same need for retail or office space. Maybe there is locally. So those are interesting things I think you're right, we need to explore.
Council?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
I agree completely. I was going to say 3 stories max, and just thinking about other cities and places that I've lived. I saw one of the slides had tulips. I'm assuming that was probably Holland. They were always one of my favorite places to study when I was in architecture, just because there's such a densely populated area, but you take a train ride and all you see are fields. And it's because they've planned smartly and they've got the dense areas, but then a lot of places still keep that charm. And I would like to see us do something like that we would have these areas, especially obviously around the transit. A lot of those buildings that were between the 30 to 50, I think that those can still be very charming, that you don't lose that, that community feel. And that you could walk a couple blocks and be in the historic downtown, which obviously doesn't get touched, that we can keep that charm. I would love to see that happen. I feel like that would be one of our best bets to be able to keep a lot of the farming area and the rest of the places that make Homestead what it is today. Besides that, I can't think of anything else right now. I just feel like we're running out of space. We really need to think about where that would be. We have not much space after the historic downtown before, within the city limits. So just to really think of which spots would make the most sense and start building from there. That's all I have. Thank you.
Councilwoman Avalo.
Thank you, Mayor. Great presentation, as
Thank you.
always. Thank you, Joe. I think that we have a unique opportunity with requiring cutting-edge design and higher standards for quality development for our downtown area. I believe that a pyramid-style design where you have the height of your downtown being more towards, let's say, US 1, and then the lower ends of that development being our Chrome Avenue sides, and maybe the outside of Harris Field, so that you have that low to high type of design would probably be, would suit what we're looking to keep in our old downtown area. I'm curious with regards to this slide, Joe, that you have up, the 6,535 dwelling units, how much of that is currently developed?
I don't know what's currently, I'll have to go back and check the GIS for the current numbers.
If you had to guess a percentage, if you don't want to guess, don't.
I
Just so I can get an idea of the gap,
it'll be like a weather prediction, totally wrong. 3,000.
Okay.
That's my guess.
All right. And then of the screen that you had up showing the RTZ, what part of that circle is in that slide, in that red zone area? Yeah. So the circle of the 6,000, is that in that entire section there?
Say that again? Yeah. Oh, yes. So
The shaded red area, not the red dot.
the
but
shaded red area is the area around is the corridor, right? That is the area where the county has said that they're going to go 60, 36, right? The
Right.
first quarter mile out, 60, the second quarter mile out of 36. The dot is not is not sized appropriately, right? The dot is a half a mile radius around theoretically the station area, but again, it's called the Metropolitan Center or the Urban Center District. So physically, it would be as wide as, you know what? Let me do it this way.
Would this dot, is this circle
That
in
circle,
that red dot or in the red shaded area?
the red that circle is essentially the red shaded area that's rectangular,
Got
right?
it. Okay. But bigger than the red dot.
But it's bigger than the red
Okay.
dot. Yes, the red dot. Let me give you a better picture.
Red
of-
dot's basically the station, right?
It's basically
That's
the
a
station,
waypoint.
but it's
Okay.
it's not defined with geographic boundaries yet. So they say it's a station. So, but my
Okay.
belief is that there are half a mile of circles, right, radius around the station, even though that's not necessarily defined. So it would be the size of one of those stations. Now, in practice, it doesn't come out to be that way because that's not what Dadeland looks like, and that's not what Cutler Bay will look like. Cutler Bay's footprint is the Southland Mall. Dadeland, let me show you again what Dadeland looks like. That's Dadeland. So it's not a half a mile on either side from the transit station, right? So in practice, when you start to put this in, that's what I don't think we should accept somebody put a half mile circle around in our downtown and say everything here is 250 units an acre. It blows up. If you were to, not that it could necessarily fully develop, but if it were to, right, you could add hundreds of thousands of people to the area. So this is a more reasonable scale development. It's tailored around specific properties, right?
That leads me to my next question. Like, how do they physically expect us to execute
Right.
that plan?
Through a process like this.
No, well, obviously policy changes, but that amount of people, how do they even walk around if they are taking the transit? Is there enough physical space to meet that recommendation of 250 units an acre?
Can I jump in real quick? I think that at 250 units per acre zoning, you would have huge amounts of redevelopment. The land becomes so valuable based on that number of units that, current commercial and single family and duplex uses just get wiped off the map. You're creating new vacant land.
I just don't see how it's feasibly possible to live in that type of environment or atmosphere. It just doesn't make sense. But our circle, it's in that section.
Kills our downtown.
And they're coming for us. So we could be scared or we could be strong and take this bull by the horns and figure it out ourselves and try to meet in the middle and come up with something and do it quality, do it quick, and do it in a way that they say, okay, that it's respectable and they can let us do our thing. Because if we just sit back and we don't do it, we're going to have a bigger fight on our hands. So.
It'll be imposed on us. So Joe, let me ask you, I know when we talked, I think at our last meeting, we talked about the boundaries of downtown being generally the Chrome corridor from Campbell down to Lucy Street. And I think by virtue of the southernmost station down the Jesse Robinson station, we would go that far south. Does that acreage, do you know offhand, does that include the former trailer park that fronts Chrome that is just ripe for one of these US 1 style of subsidized projects? That parcel really scares me to death. That is huge. And it's designated southwest Hun.
I think it is. Yeah, I think that's in the half-mile radius that we're showing here. I don't know if it's within those boundaries that you had suggested. To go back to the answer, I mean, I think you can see that this Dadeland type development isn't too. I don't know what it nets out to be units per acre, but you've got to have land for parking, right? If it was smartly designed, you have to have land for streets. It's got to be the right size. And James just mentioned you got to fulfill the infrastructure needs with concurrency, right? You can take care of the transportation infrastructure needs, the capacity with the train or the BRT, right? So it's the right size. We know that this amount of people can move with that, and you can also reduce parking so that not only is a car not needed, you can't even fit it, right? You can't not many people can take a car to New York City, so you start to do that. But then again, you've got water and sewer capacity issues that would start to put a limit on development. Until very recently, I don't know if Julio's not here, but we're limited by water and sewer pump station capacity now, right? And we're not developing 4-story buildings, right? We're developing 1-story buildings. So
The impact fees would pay for all that additional infrastructure?
yeah, theoretically, the impact fees would do that. Now, the county suggested earlier that the cities would have to contribute their impact fees to the development of stuff, but they pulled that back. Now, they would only take their portion of the impact fees and apply it to this type of thing. But yeah, that's what the impact fees would go for.
I think my vision is to try to keep our small town feel, but having big town amenities and big town job opportunities. So there has to be a way to figure that out, like you suggested, talking to more people. Let's go to Vegas. Let's figure out what we can bring back. I like this, the picture that you have up. It has that, at least one side of the pyramid going on. We need to get that other side. And consider keeping US 1 that focus for the height and scaling it down to our Chrome Avenue side so that our beautiful royal palm trees are the highest peaks of our old downtown area. I think that's a good middle ground. And, we just got to keep working our elected officials with what's reasonable and what we can actually function with in our town.
I think one of the way these things usually go out, the way they get refined, and the other cities have done charrette processes where they take the map of the area, they lay it out, and they start to draw on it and generate ideas. Not only ideas of what space are you looking for and where could you possibly do this, but what you can avoid, right? So, and then how you want the buildings to look as you avoid it. So I understand it's critically important. You want to maintain the Chrome, Washington area. You may be able to keep that at a low scale, and you may be able to push any taller development back off of it so that you can't even see it from the street level on Chrome, so not to ruin the ambiance of that street because it is what you are. And we can, yeah, it's a little bit of a pain, but you could go walk these types of places, and maybe we could tour them, right? You go to South Miami. South Miami has got a very Chrome-ish downtown on Sunset, right? It's a one-story type of thing. It's an old city, just like Homestead is. It's one of the first cities in the county, just like Homestead. Not saying that their development is right, but again, it is starting. They rewrote their code very similar to what you were thinking about 25 years ago, right? And it hasn't necessarily grown up yet, but it's starting to. So it would be interesting to go to that community and look at what they're doing because they have very many of the same concerns that we have here in Homestead about preserving the character of the community. That may be an interesting place to look at. Maybe interesting to talk to the people who administered to that and who wrote that code to see how it works. And
Joe, I was going to mention Sunset, but I didn't want to insult you since it wasn't on the presentation. But I like that idea. And can we have one of our next workshops be, for lack of a better word, and I'm a mom, a field trip? And let's take a drive. I'll drive if you want. And let's go to these towns around Dade County and identify what we love and take those pieces back to our downtown, and let's learn from their mistakes, and let's take what they did well with and create the best downtown Miami-Dade County has. We are the last, right, to be done. Use that to our advantage.
We'll take one of Councilman Shelley's trolleys. Oh, and one of the issues,
We got to get out of Homestead, and we have to think larger, think bigger, and then trim it back.
absolutely so. One of the questions I was going to have for Joe, and I send him articles all the time. He and Kate get junk from me several times a day. I think probably a lot of us have concerns about that balance between subsidized and market rate. Attracting a demographic that has disposable income in order to support restaurants and businesses downtown and throughout the community. Do we need to look at perhaps adjusting upward minimum unit sizes in some regards in order to avoid that lower end? I mean, we've seen articles recently where the average size of apartments and condos throughout the country are tending to trend up in metropolitan areas. And we've got a pretty, I guess, we call it conservative minimum size, but I'm wondering that if we need to again look at that and increase that to help promote true market rate, long-term home prices.
I think we need to do our homework. I think what you said is interesting, and I'll tell you a story, but I would suggest we talk to those people that build this stuff and sell it to see what the people who are buying it want to see, right? A few years ago, we were harping on some of the large home builders that were building homes in the DRI area and saying aesthetically the product didn't look like we wanted it to look. And we were trying to get a better product out of the thing. And we would drive around in Homestead and look at stuff and point to the developers, look at this type of thing. So one of them took us on a field trip, and we went to some of the developments that were not in Homestead and looked at their work, and it was more attractive and seemed to be more functional. And so what they told us was that they're working at a price point, right? To sell this development, it's got to be it's got to be less expensive than those developments. And evidently, if a development is the same cost, the one further north will get sold first, right? So the units had to be less expensive here. And so to make them less expensive, they took these amenities out of it. I don't know if the inside of the units look the same, but the outside certainly has less amenities here in Homestead than it would just up the road off the Turnpike or on US 1 as you go north, or even into Doral where these guys do this type of thing. So it's interesting to start to explore what's in their minds as they go and try to sell these things to people. And I think that's a fundamental building block for how we would keep our zoning code current. I don't know where our unit sizes came from or what they relate to, or if home buyers are looking for things of that size anymore, whether they're smaller or larger or whichever. And I know some cities that constantly review their zoning codes on an annual basis to make sure that they don't get out of scale and they're not dealing with these things, these zoning things, like whatever the lot size is or the unit size that are 40 years old and no longer relevant to any type of market. So I think that's an idea we have to start exploring.
All right. I've seen some articles recently about some really neat projects in Coral Gables. I think MG Development's doing, and for me, architecture is very important. If you can hide high density and that you don't look at it and say, that's really high density or that's just your average apartment or condo building. I mean, to me, I think that adds to the, and again, my word, the aesthetic and the desirability of our community. So, Joe, what do you need from us?
Can I get a few words?
Sure.
We'll go to Vice Mayor
Councilman.
then.
Mayor, if I may.
Sure. Go ahead. I'm going to let Councilman
Thank you.
Roth jump in first.
Oh,
Who's next in line?
yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Go ahead.
thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Joe, you started off probably saying the right thing. You're going to have 7 different opinions on what should happen down there, or in the area, or around that little circle, or in that pink box, or anything like that. One of the things I like to think of, we're making decisions up here that are going to affect the future. And with what the county is proposing, I think is very, very irresponsible of them to impose the densities that they're considering, and not thinking about the safety of the people that live in the area already. We have a tropical storm that's, and God went a different way, didn't turn into anything massive, but we've all experienced evacuating this area during a natural disaster coming our way. And if they continue to create that type of density further south, it just makes it harder for us down at the south end of Miami-Dade County and those in Monroe County to evacuate if we're given an order to do so. So I hope that that is part of the conversation they're having with these incredible thoughts of increasing the density this far south. We have really, well, now we have 3 roads out of here. We have Chrome Avenue, we have US 1, we have the Turnpike. But I don't think any of that will support a major evacuation if a storm's coming from us from the south and heading due north straight up the Keys. Like, I think one happened back in the 50s. It came kind of straight up US 1. And back then we didn't have the density issues we have today, but we would have definitely the evacuation problems. So safety, I think, is one that has to be really considered. The other is, I don't think we're creating a downtown. I think this process was started as a revitalization of a downtown area. And I was always in support of creating a residential component to that. Now, I never envisioned anybody saying there was going to be a 25-story building on Chrome Avenue in downtown Homestead. It never occurred to me that that would happen. And so long as I'm here, that won't happen. There has to be a balance between the history of Homestead, the ruralness of Homestead, the agricultural part of Homestead, you know, whether it's from Campbell to Lucy or 4th Street to Lucy or whatever is decided to create that area, that has to be preserved. You go around the country, you see all these old towns that have preserved a portion of their heritage. You can't preserve it in its current state and form forever, because everything changes. Everything evolves into something else or something newer or something better. But the character in which the city of Homestead was established back in 1913, right? 1913? Has to be preserved in some way. So the other thought I have was if you can bring up the downtown land use map for a minute. If we're going to figure out and try to plan some of this stuff, and it's not going to happen tonight, but I don't know if all of us understand the magnitude of the different shades. I go to there's one more, I think. It was actually called the downtown land use map that had all the different colors and different zonings, and I don't know if there was 18 different categories, and
I'll get it.
I think part of what should come out of these discussions is, regardless of what the county does, and if the county is historical in the way they do things, it's going to take years and years, and none of us will be up here when they start to really implement any of that stuff. So, but, well, they're going to have to go through a lot of hoops and stuff. I mean, I'm not a lobbyist. I don't understand what the state's role is going to be in this and how they can take our rights away from the municipalities and how we want our city and our town to be, and they can just come in here and say, nope, you're going to do this. I don't know how that works. I'm sure lawsuits will be filed. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of issues. So with that said, we have a canvas that's in place that we can work with now, regardless of what any other municipality or any other agency or any other county or whoever says to us. This is what we have to work with right now, and we'll deal with what comes at us in the future. But we have to figure out amongst us today, because we're the ones having this discussion today, is what do we want this area to look like? You know, do we want to recategorize and rezone? As the mayor said, that if we put in parcels that are going to be 20 or 30 units per acre, are they going to be as valuable as an acre that's got 250 units on it? No, they're not going to be. But that's not what we want here anyways. We don't want 250 units per acre. But we do want some density to support the growth in the revitalization of the downtown area. So that's a workshop in itself to figure out what it is, what will be, where do we want it to start, where do we want it to end, how far back do we want it to go. I guess we're recreating the Southwest Master Plan again too, because that's most of it's in the Southwest Master Plan. So when you look at that oval that surrounds this area, there's not too much that's in there that's vacant that you can say, okay, yeah, you can go ahead and start building there and let's see what happens and build it, they'll come, whatever. But the residential component is going to be extremely important to attracting those other businesses to the area, the restaurants you guys want, the activities, the things. I was in an area, I forget, it was Lehigh Acres or Fort Myers or somewhere over a couple weeks ago, and I wanted some ice cream. I said, okay, I Googled Cold Stone ice cream. And I'm like driving through Duplex City and all these little areas of, you know, just houses, just stuff. And all of a sudden I pull into this area where it was Cold Stone ice cream. And it was this beautiful area that was built up. Everything was brand new. People were there playing and they had little parks, and I was like, wow, that is really cool. You know, that's starting to happen somewhat on the east side, but there's nothing happening like that on the west side of the city. And that's what we have to figure out. What is it we want to do? How do we want to do it? How do we want to present it to people? I had a couple other things. Market rate versus affordable housing. When I hear the term affordable housing, it's exactly how people have described it already tonight. It's some sort of subsidized housing. Market rate rent is free market. It is what you can get for it. Just as Joe described just a few minutes ago, why the developers weren't putting the amenities in our community as they were doing up the road was basically market. The market didn't demand it down here. Rents have gone through the roof. If developers would have developed here 6, 7, 8 years ago, as we were talking to them in the downtown area, where they could only get $800, $900 a month for rent. Today they were getting they'd be getting $1,500, $1,600 a month in rent for those same units. So they didn't have the foresight, and I think that's one of the things that we are looking for is somebody to come in here with foresight to do those things for us. But we have to figure out first what we want, and then once we have that, we could market to the rest of the world. Listen, this is what we would like. This is what we can do. This is how we can get to that point, and we can begin from there. So, but the market rate is very important. We can't do the subsidized. We already offered that out on the southwest side to the Shotgun property, so that's going to be subsidized property for senior citizens. That's not what I envision along the Chrome Avenue area, in the downtown area, is that kind of stuff. So we have to come up with that plan first. And I guess this goes into the thought process of creating the higher density. Do we want to encourage demolition of some of these areas to developers to bring in the more modern style housing, whether it be apartment units that are market rent or townhouses or condos, a higher density product in the downtown area at this time? Do we want to encourage that? Do we want to encourage blocks being taken down and new stuff going up? I mean, I guess the only way you do that is by increasing density in those areas to make the properties more valuable. Some people may want to sell those properties if they can get, 4 or 5 times what the value is, because it becomes more valuable at the time. So that's something to consider also when we start thinking about how to attract some of the density. I shouldn't say density. Some of the newer construction, the better products, to create that marketable rent that we would really like to see in the area, but control the density part of it. I don't want to see a 25-story building in downtown Homestead. I'm good with 4 stories, 3 stories, 5 stories, somewhere in that ballpark. 10 stories to me is a little bit, high, but it depends on what part of the area it's going to be in. Not directly on Chrome Avenue, but you could start low and go higher as you go back west. Whatever the plan is. But thinking about the county, and Joe, how long do you think it is before they really start ramping up that irresponsible plan I think they have?
The commissioner suggested that they wanted to have something moving through by August or September, but realistically, it's in pretty bad shape right now, and we don't see it being able to move through that quickly. So the earliest you would see sometime before, the fall, sometime in the fall, maybe the holiday season, but, our goal is hopefully never, right?
Yeah, and that's my whole point, is that we have the nucleus to work with. We kind of can direct what we do with our city, and if it comes to that point, then we can rally, then we can do what we have to do to slow that process or even stop the process altogether. So thank you, Mayor, for my time. I appreciate it.
And we are, trust me, we are. All right, thank you. Vice Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, Joe. A lot of healthy conversations from my colleagues, and I share a lot of your concerns. It's very frustrating when, I'll say, outside entities attempt to usurp local control. The density, the proposed density from the county, I think is very irresponsible, and they are not in tune to the needs of our community, and they're not sensitive to the overall look, feel, and character that we want. So I think it's very important for us to be proactive and put on the table what we would like to see, which takes me to that slide. I believe it says, where do we go from here? Can you go to that slide, Joe? Or what would we like to see? I forget the exact verbiage. It was economic development, market rate housing, affordable housing. I think once we come, no, it's not how do we get there. I think as a council, we're pretty much on the same page. I agree with Councilwoman Avila, like taking a field trip to other communities to get an idea and some inspiration as far as what those specific communities are like, and the overall historical perspective is very important. Councilman Shelley and I participated in the Good Government Initiative with former Commissioner Katie Sorensen, and that is essentially what we did. We traveled Miami-Dade and Broward County to look at different developments and come back to our communities and determine what we can do to improve whatever area that we're focusing on. So particularly for the downtown, for me, economic development is very, very important. We've been talking about that for several years, but I feel as a city we really haven't defined, communicated a clear plan of action for economic development. So I think when it comes to the downtown, economic development definitely has to be a priority. Affordable housing versus market rate housing. Thank you, Mayor, for asking that question to develop a common language of what affordable housing versus market rate housing really means. And Joe, I think you did a great job, but I think you kind of danced around a little bit what affordable housing is. I think it needs to be further defined because some people are clearly don't have an understanding of what affordable housing is, and then there are misconceptions of affordable housing being subsidized housing. So we have to have a clear common language relative to that. My question to you, as it relates to subsidized housing, do you have a percentage of subsidized units that we have in the city? Like what percentage of our community is made up of subsidized housing?
I don't have a number with that, but I do know that if you look at the, I'm not quite sure it says it in the rapid transit zone proposal, but when the federal government, when it judges these rapid transit lines, they're looking for at least 20% of affordable housing within those station areas.
Wait, affordable housing or subsidized housing?
I'm thinking they're the same thing, but
The RTZ
Well, no.
the RTZ talked about workforce housing, 12.5% workforce
right. So
housing.
each of those have definitions that we need to define because they.
Yeah, it has to be clear because it's a lot of jargon.
Yes, before the next meeting, I'll define those, and they're formula based, right? You know, which affordable housing is a certain percent of the house. The monthly rent shouldn't be more than a certain percent of the household income, and that's standardized kind of locally, county by county, or places like that. So let me get those definitions so that we're all clear.
Yes, that has to be defined because I think it was Councilman Roth just referenced the shotgun property. That is considered subsidized housing, correct?
It will be, yes, senior living. Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Right. So, Joe, you just mentioned subsidized housing and affordable housing is the same. But earlier, you gave a definition that could have been a little different.
Correct. I'm using the word affordable in two ways that are making it confusing. When I was referencing affordable in the first place, in the early part of the presentation, my intention was to say that housing was still market rate. It was just less expensive than other places. When you start to get into affordable, in the sense that the housing cost can be no more than a certain percent of an income level, that is typically subsidized because a house is a house is a house. It costs X amount to build, and if you're going to artificially keep the rents low, there's generally a subsidy in there somewhere, whether it be free land or a density bonus or a rent abatement or something like that. So I need to define that better and quit using confusing terms.
Yeah, I think that'll be helpful for all of us so that we have that common language and can clearly communicate that when we're speaking to residents or at these meetings. So in sum, for me, I think basically we need to push back on the county's plan and do everything that we can to slow that train down so that we can determine what our downtown will look like. I think the field trips are definitely in order. Sunset Place, South Miami. I love the fact that it's very walkable and they don't have large towering buildings in the area. It appears to be a height restriction, so that'll be a good community to go into. Coral Gables, I think you can pretty much see a bit of everything in Coral Gables at this point. So definitely going outside to get inspiration to come back inside would be very, very healthy. And then I think we should prioritize these goals, revenue, business, prioritize them in order of importance. All of them are important, but I think we should prioritize them. And then market our downtown as such. An example of this, in several schools I've worked at, I knew the type of families that I wanted to attract. So I put plans in place in order to attract those type of families that I wanted to attract, and it worked. So that's essentially what we have to do here as well, know what we want, and then put the plans in place to attract a different type of clientele that we're trying to reach. So with that, I have nothing further, but I thank you all for the conversation.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Someone else wanted to jump in? Councilwoman?
I just want to add one more thing. The income restricted type properties too. We have a bunch of that in the city also. After Hurricane Andrew, they forced a lot of income restricted properties that are on the East Maui side of US 1. And those were all built with government subsidies as well. They had tax issues or they had tax abatements and things like that on those properties. So that's not something I want to talk about, but that also could be a form of affordable housing, although those people are restricted on the amount of income they can make, so it's a little bit different form, but we do have a lot of that on the east side of US 1 there.
But those statistics, I think, are beneficial to demonstrate to the county that you don't need to impose any further income, workforce, affordable in the subsidized context on Homestead. That we're carrying far more than our share of the greater South 8 area at large. I think if we could, get a count of apartments built as apartments, I think it's safe to say that, most folks that walking around with the money in their pocket to rent are not able to rent a true apartment. That you've got to go rent a townhouse and typically or a home.
Yeah, you're right. And there hasn't been a true apartment complex built in the city since Hurricane Andrew.
Correct.
So, I mean.
But we have a proliferation of older apartment units. Councilwoman?
What would it take to have an actual rendering available for us to kind of compile all of our ideas and our vision after our field trip and have something that we can actually look at and have a discussion of general consensus if we like that or tweak it and then go from there?
Yeah, what I would suggest is we somehow figure out not a workshop like this. I mean, I think these are the beginning stages of that, but something more interactive, more charrette, where we take a map and some tracing paper and lay it on the table and start to draw things like boundaries and then get into discussions about architecture and building height and things that we like to see. And somebody will do what I did and show us pictures of places, and we start to pick what we like, and then kind of we'll decipher what we're all saying and take the commonalities of it out and then start to list them, right? I think what we're doing now is brainstorming, and now the hard part is collecting all that information, taking the things that are common, right, and making a list of them, and then throwing out the things that aren't, right? We know through this conversation that we don't want 25 stories, we don't want 250 units an acre, we want market rate stuff, we need a more defined geographic area, we want to preserve the character and quality of life of Homestead, and what that means to downtown is Chrome Avenue. And then so we put together those words, we send it back to you, you check it, we keep refining it till we're in the right place. And then like the vice mayor said, then we're not developers in the city of Homestead. The government's not a developer. Unless you have land that you can use for development, you're not the developer. So you've got to sell it to the development community and attract them to come in. And I think that's the hardest part, right? You could put this stuff in place and it'd be the greatest thing on paper, but if there's no market, I mean, that's a second phase. That's where the economic development comes into play. And South Dade suffered from that forever. I mean, forever, right? We just haven't, the only market we've had here is housing. And for somehow we've allowed the development community to dump housing in South Dade, everywhere from 88th Street south, right, over decades. And it's left us with a horrible development, horrible traffic problems across the board, right? And there's not been much thought into it. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons that, you know, when it wasn't too long ago in the 1980s, there was 5 cities in Miami-Dade County. Now there's 35 cities because we couldn't, you know, they kept dumping, they couldn't take care of us as communities, right? We had to protect our neighborhoods. Now we're here protecting our neighborhoods, just like this process you're going through now. So I think we're at the beginning stages of this. We just carry on and start to keep refining it and move forward. And eventually those types of drawings come out of it and they get refined over and over and over again. And in a little while, we have pictures of something we actually want to do that we can, ultimately it's got to get approved, right? So you're going to go, ultimately the end of this from the municipal perspective is you get something at your city council meeting that says density, height, geographic area. And like everything else we always do in development, somebody's going to come out and yell at us about it, right? So there's going to be a sales pitch to the community that this is the right thing to do, right? And that usually doesn't happen in 1 or 2 meetings. That's a interactive public thing because they're not like regular, some guy comes in, he wants to do development, and we're just, as the planning director and the elected officials, we're evaluating that based on current code. That's easy compared to writing the code and then being the developer, where our hands are tied, right? It's 6 stories, it's 2 stories, it's 8 units an acre, whatever. This is what you get. Here, we're going to be saying something that's different, and that's going to raise eyebrows. We're going to have to sell it. So it's a moderately long process that this is the beginning part of.
Okay, so our next meeting will be a driving workshop, and then we'll have a workshop in your office to draw it and put it on trace paper. And
Can
then-
I put together a proposal for you on how to do that? I mean,
Yeah.
like, I don't want to commit to anything right now without us sitting as staff and figuring it out exactly how we might do it. I could say workshop, but I don't know if Councilmember Shelley will give us the trolley or if it's got enough gas to get up to South Miami or wherever we're going. So let me figure that out, and I'll communicate back through the manager on how we could do this.
Thank you. Councilman Shelley.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I think I agree with what Joe had said, and that is, you know, kind of a charrette, taking it to the next level, which is getting a lot of feedback. And actually, I would encourage maybe even bringing in, if possible, experts in different areas. So you have someone who can talk about, you know, what the market is actually looking for. Because what I also don't want to do is have us go and our viewpoints and what we think is great, create something, and then we end up with kind of what we have with the Southwest Master Plan, which on paper looks great. I mean, it's a beautiful community, you know, Key West style, but nobody wants to build it. And it costs too much for the developers to build it. And so ultimately, it doesn't go anywhere. And every time someone comes to us, every developer has asked for a variance from that particular master plan. And so a lot of time and effort went into it. And so what I want to make sure is that we get viewpoints from different experts in the field, whether it be the development community or it be, you know, the condo community or whatever it might be, that we get to hear those different viewpoints as we're making and developing our decisions, then have these charrettes where we're actually, you know, taking that information that we receive, whether it be in field trip form or other format from these experts, and now actually leading that discussion to develop what that plan is going to look like. And then possibly even vetting that out, obviously, through the community itself and saying, okay, this is what we've envisioned based on all these resources. Community, what do you think? Because they may come back and say, well, we don't like that at all, or they may say that's great, but add this or add that. So I do think we have a lot of steps left to take before we get to the finish line. But I do agree, you know, I didn't really comment much on the counties when I spoke the first time. I agree we push back as hard as we possibly can. I don't think we let them preempt or control what we're doing. And if it looks like we're going to lose that battle, I think somewhere in your presentation you mentioned kind of the process being that if a city already has something in place, that whatever the county passes won't necessarily trump the existing code, but the minute they change their code, it has to be brought up to conformity of the county. So I don't know exactly how that plays out from a legal perspective and details, but again, motivation for us to go ahead, figure out what we want to do before the county does it, adopt what we think is going to be our long-term plan, so that if the county doesn't listen to us and doesn't pay attention to what we're doing, we have that code that hopefully will last for the next 25 or 50 years until we have to make a major change, so that we don't end up having to adopt the code, and maybe in the meantime, we're able to get the county to change their mind, years from now. So, but I think all good discussion tonight, great ideas from my colleagues, and I look forward to moving this forward with you guys.
Thank you. Joe, do
Yes, sir.
you and everybody else on staff have what you need from us? You know where we want to go from here?
Yes.
Very good. Anything further from council? Madam Manager,
No, thank you, Mayor.
have a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Thank you all. Appreciate it.